Ladies and gentlemen, Walter Cronkite.
Good morning. Oh, thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.
Hello there and welcome once again to Comedy from Home. This is the comedy show that comes to you from my office right here in my home in Southern California. I am your host, Don McMillan. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you're doing well. And yes, you just did see me introducing the legendary Walter Cronkite. It was one of the highlights of my career. I got to interview, yes, me, Don McMillan, got to interview Walter Cronkite. It was June 12th, 2002. It was a corporate event, and they came to me and they said, you know, Walter would rather be interviewed than just give a talk. Would you mind doing it? Would I mind doing it? Oh my God. It was one of the highlights of my entire life. I grew up watching Walter Cronkite do the news and cover all the Apollo missions. And I used to watch 21st Century, the show about the future. And he promised me a jetpack, and I still haven't got my jetpack, and I'm still a little bitter about that, Walter. But I got to interview him. It's about a 37-minute long interview, and I thought I would share it this week because it is so amazingly insightful. What, 19 years later, he talked about democracy and the keys to democracy and truth and journalism. And he talked about media and how television and he didn't really know the impact of social media yet, but how we had to really be careful about how that was going to affect society and democracy. And it's an amazing interview. He saw this stuff coming in his brain and he was worried about it. And a lot of it is coming true. So it's a fun interview. It's insightful. It was amazing to watch me get to talk to Walter Cronkite. I think you'll enjoy it. It's really long. It's probably the longest show by far that I've ever done, but I didn't want to cut it because it's just a gem. And the world deserved to see Walter Cronkite's thoughts and maybe take to heart some of his messages that he had to say today. 19 years after he actually gave this talk is still so true. So I hope you enjoy this. There's some funny parts. There's some serious parts. And Walter Cronkite, just a thrill to get to talk to him. And so I hope you enjoy it. In the meantime, stay healthy, keep laughing, and here comes Walter Cronkite and me.
Wow, you already got your standing ovation. I wouldn't say a thing. Well, you know, when you watch that video, you were there for everything.
Well, you know, on this video might look like a promotional piece, but really it was intended, we put it together as kind of an introduction to these conversations to remind everybody of some of the things we've been through in this last half century.
Yeah.
The last half of the 20th century undoubtedly was one of the most turbulent periods of American history, and the decade of the 60s, definitely the most turbulent decade of the perhaps of our nation, even including the Revolutionary period, the Civil War. The Vietnam matter divided us philosophically, whereas the Civil War had divided us geographically, which was not as terrible a thing really, although the cost of lives, of course, was terrible. But dividing us philosophically was a very great strain on our society.
Well, you had civil rights, you had JFK assassination, and since this is a technological audience, the moon landing, I mean, that has to be...
Oh, that was the greatest. You know, it wasn't just getting the man to the moon, it was getting the pictures back from the moon on television. I thought that was...
They didn't have the internet then, I don't believe. I don't think they had the internet when they were on the moon.
No.
Yeah.
They didn't have the internet, which is probably just as well. Everybody had been on the internet, and I wouldn't have been on the air at all. You know, there are a couple of little stories in that film there that...
You say there were some stories from that video, some insight into that video, some of the stuff that was...
I've got some inside stories on the video.
You never wore any pants underneath that desk, did you?
You know, there's that one little scene in there, the chimpanzee jumping in my
right,
lap
I saw it,
there,
yeah.
you know. That was one of those wonderful little sidebars that never gets on the air, actually. But we were doing a story about the organizations, American and British particularly, who were trying to preserve the chimpanzee's life in the jungles at the point where poachers were killing the mothers and kidnapping the babies and shipping them around the world to those who wanted them for pets, and there were many people that paid great fortunes for them, and those for scientific purposes as well. And the problem with them, they're wonderful pets, right up to puberty. Right up to that
A lot
point,
like people in that respect.
They're kind of like human beings, you know. That once those kids reach puberty, get them out of the house. You almost had to do that with the chimpanzees. They got so darn strong and so tough, and with the sex drive as well, that you just had to get rid of them. And even the scientists did. They really lost a lot of their value when they got so darn strong and tough in their adolescence. And so these organizations, besides trying to intercept the poachers and get the babies still while they were in the jungle, to get them back in the jungle, took these aged ones who've gotten into the 12th, 13th year and took them back and taught them how to go back into the jungle and live. It's a very touching story, and a very dramatic one. We went back deep into the jungles to get the story. Well, we were now about to leave Africa, and I was doing the openings and closes of the broadcast, sitting under this tree with 3 little chimpanzees playing around in my lap. Cutest things. And my opening copy that I worked up was something along, you know, these chimpanzees are lovable fellows. They are the animals closest to us of all other living species, and they're so much like us. They act, and a couple of little items like that. And then I said, and you know, it even seems, and this one little guy was in my lap, I said, it even seems that they love us. And with that, he kind of cocked his head back and took a look at me and went whap, and almost took my head off, you know. And of course, the producer, director, they all thought it was very funny, except me. So they said, well, let's try it again. We'll try it again. So I'm going through this same routine, the same thing. I get to that line, almost seem to love us. Whack! 3 times that chimp did that. You can't tell me he didn't understand what I was saying. He said, come on, don't give me that junk about you.
Apparently he wasn't ready for commitment.
Yeah. That little picture there of Ike Eisenhower on the beach with the Jeep. We were doing the anniversary of D-Day, and this was the first trip he'd been back and really had a chance to look around. Mm-hmm. He'd been on the beaches, of course, shortly after we landed. Then he'd been back a couple of times as president and the chief of the armies. And both of those times it was very ceremonial. De Gaulle was there, bands were playing, the troops were marching. You didn't get a chance to see anything then. But with us doing this remembrance, long 2-hour documentary, he had it all to himself, and he had a ball looking at the revetments and the pill boxes and all that. He had a wonderful time. And at this point on our film, we're on the beach, and I'm going to drive the Jeep along the beach, and he's going to tell me what happened there on Omaha Beach. Mm-hmm. And I said to our producer, Fred Friendly, I said, I've got an idea. You know, he's showing me. Why doesn't Ike drive? And that way it'll seem more normal than he's showing me. Well, Fred Friendly, producers, as you know only too well, of course, they always have great ideas. And he said to the president, he said, I've got a great idea. Why don't you drive? You do drive, don't you? And so Ike, of course, said he drives. No American boy would bet he doesn't drive. So now we're changing seats. He's getting in the driver's seat. And up on the hill, Mamie Eisenhower and my wife are watching us below. And Mamie reaches over and grabs Betsy's arm and says, my dear, is Ike going to drive? And Betsy said, well, it certainly looks like it. She said, oh, my dear, your husband's never been in greater danger. Then she said, you know, he hasn't driven in 25 years. He didn't drive at all well then.
But you lived through that. You lived through that, right?
We lived through that.
Yeah,
fortunately.
Now, this audience is, you know, we're mostly technological folks, and I've been curious, since you're not doing the newscast, are you an internet person? Do you get on the internet at all?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Are you like Walter at Cronkite.com or something?
I get my news and on there, and, as well as the morning papers and the television. But
what do you think of the whole thing? Isn't it amazing, the connectivity we have now?
Oh, on the internet, of course, yes, very definitely so. I'm a little worried about the use of the internet by irresponsible people who pretend to be journalists. I think that's a very dangerous trend. And I do think that those who get on the internet and spread rumors, do not have facts as if they were facts. I think that what we ought to do is, without in any way impacting freedom of speech or press. I wouldn't touch that for a minute. But there's no reason those people shouldn't have to answer the same laws of libel and slander as the rest of us do. The newspapers, the broadcasters, we all have to, if we can be sued if we put falsehoods out on the air or in our newspapers. Well, they ought to be made subject to the similar laws of libel and slander. And I think it would bring them down to the right level. They could still use their imagination, but not on what should be factual material, and particularly that which affects one's reputation.
Right. You know, one of the things that the internet has caused is the time. I mean, in early journalism, you could check your sources and double check your facts. Now that the time to get something on the air is so short.
Well, that's part of it.
Where's the line there?
Well, that's part of the skill of being a journalist. That's how, when you have to pull back, you can't go ahead and publish simply because you've got a deadline.
You never did that.
You've got to get the facts right
Come
first.
on, you must have did that once.
Oh, no.
You never made up anything on the air.
Well, but I have played a very important part in the social life of Houston, Texas. I was a cub reporter on the Houston Press, and one of my duties was to get the bank clearings every day. A little tiny line, one line at the bottom of the front page of the Houston Press every day. So Houston bank clearings. Houston bank clearings were $32,732,000 and so forth. I got that from the bank clearinghouse and put it in the paper every day. And I did fairly well. I was a cub reporter. I did fairly well for a couple of weeks. And then the third week came, and suddenly the city editor is yelling, "Cronkite!" across the city room. The worst thing you could hear was that voice. He meant, "Get up here on my desk right now." And I did, and he said, "You made a mistake in the bank clearings." He said, "You said 83,700,023 cents, and it was 22 cents. I said, "Oh, come on,
wow.
That can't make, don't tell me what it makes a difference. Of course it makes a difference. You can't imagine what trouble you caused." Well, I thought I was going to be fired. And that evening at the time when we all kind of went downstairs and had a 3-2 beer, and the last paper had gone to bed, a couple of the older reporters said, "Boy, kid, you're in trouble. You're in real trouble. Have you got yourself a bodyguard?" I said, "A bodyguard? What are you talking about?" "Those bank clearings." I said, "My God, of the 1 cent difference on $82 million, I mean, how can nobody cares about that." They said, "Kid, don't you know why we publish those every day?" And I said, "Well, I guess finance people want to know." "Oh, come on, kid." He said, "That's the number the lottery pays off on. The illegal lottery in Houston pays off on that number. You were one number wrong. That cost them a lot of money." So you got to be careful what you do in journalism.
You're lucky they didn't make you pay that money.
Well, yeah. Well, I could have paid the $82 million. You know, it was Houston in those days.
Now, I heard a story once.
I didn't have stock in Enron at the moment.
I heard a story once. You were a sports broadcaster for a while, and you got a little creative once, did you not? During a game?
Well, we did have a problem with one game. We were broadcasting. I did wire service reports, Western Union reports that I dialed up and made it sound like we were really at the game. And we were doing Southern Cal, Notre Dame, and the line went down. This information that I got from this Western Union operator at Southern Cal, and the line went down. I had no information. It was the third quarter, and but the line went down frequently for a minute or two, a couple of minutes, and I'd always just fill in a commercial or something of the kind for a couple of minutes. And I started doing that, filled in a bit. Well, at 3 minutes, it's still down, too long for the commercial. So I substituted a couple of players in there. That took a while, and fiddling around. Now 4 or 5 minutes went. The wire's still down. Nothing I could do, but I resumed play, and I moved the teams up and down the field for it was 14 minutes. 24 minutes. 24 minutes that the line was down for. We had the longest quarter in the history of collegiate football. I moved those teams up and down, and unfortunately, when we came back, it turned out that Notre Dame had scored. Well, at that point, I had Southern Cal with the ball. They were down about the 40-yard line, so I had to get Southern Cal to kick, Notre Dame to advance the ball. It took me a while to advance the ball for them to finally score, to get the score where it should have been. It was, I say, the longest quarter in the history of football.
These people would call that a patch. You patched it.
Yeah.
You fixed the bug.
Yeah. I fixed the bug, right.
Now, I can't go too far into the interview without talking about 9/11. It's affected all our lives, and since you've been through so much of this, first of all, what was it like for you watching the coverage of the 9/11 stuff?
Well, we were in Europe. I was in Europe and Italy at the time that it happened, and as we were driving around Florence, just about to drive up to Pizza for dinner, just had lunch, and our driver spoke some fairly broken English, but he heard on his cellular phone from another driver, and he turned around to us and said, "An airplane has hit your twin towers." Well, we never thought of those, the twin towers, never used that phrase, and I couldn't figure out what he was saying. The accent was very difficult. I didn't know what he was saying. That plane hit. I finally got the idea, but of course I assumed it was an accident. We'd had one of those with the Empire State Buildings, in World War II, with a military plane, and it seemed possible. But I said, let's go back to the hotel rather than go on up to Pizza, and we'll tune in. Well, we were able to tune in CNN, which in Italy is on 24 hours in English. All the others are on briefly in English, but not all day. CNN was, so we stayed with CNN. We got back in time to see the replay of the second plane hitting the tower. And obviously it was then obvious that something was going on other than accident. We stayed with the coverage as much as we could. CNN did a great job. The little bit that I saw the CBS, NBC on, they looked good as well. When I got back a week later or 5 days later on the following Sunday, I thought that the networks were doing an excellent job. I thought the anchor people were maintaining the calm they needed to. They weren't getting hysterical about the thing. They were reporting only facts. They had one of the worst jobs you can have in television anchoring, reporting, is that they're seeing the same picture that the public's seeing without any other information. There's nothing they can say except you see it now. And that's tough. As soon as you get reporters out in the field who are reporting back to you, and you can say what's happening and explain the pictures, then you're all right. But that terrible time when you got to just ad lib around something that you're seeing the same thing the public's seeing is not a comfortable position to be in.
As a media person, what do you think of there's got to be a fine line now between national security and the news. What can we let out? Like I saw in the paper this morning, the dirty bomb suspect.
Yeah.
I guess the White House is a little upset about the release of that information. How do you view that? Does the public have the right to know everything, or where's that line drawn?
Well, no. Obviously, there's security matters that the public cannot share, unfortunately. However, we've got to let the public share with everything possible that we can without endangering our security. This democracy depends upon an intelligent, an informed public. It can't operate otherwise. The public, we are the people. We are the government. The government represents us. We have elected them to represent us for a limited period of time, limited so that there's no business of their passing the baton back and forth without our being able to say that's okay, that's the way to run it. And it is terribly important that we are informed what our government, and particularly our military, is doing in our name. Same thing is true with what our courts and what our prosecutors are doing in our name. We cannot yield our civil rights our human rights in the interests of security, because that is the loss of our democracy in its essence. So it's important that we balance these things. And we must be terribly careful of not being misled by these accusations that one dissident or another might be unpatriotic. Who is to judge what patriotism is? Patriotism, it is easy to define. If you're talking about the Congress has gone to war, they've got the sole power to declare us in war. Sole power. The administration don't have a right to declare war. And we're in a war out now in Afghanistan that the Congress has not declared. But in pursuing that, we also must understand that we have a right to dissent. We have a right to say, wait a minute, we don't like what the government's doing. If, as I say, the war has been legally declared, and the government and the Congress has approved a draft, a universal draft, then the legal thing is the patriotic thing. You have to observe the draft. Not doing so is unpatriotic. However, to stand up and say what the government is doing is wrong is definitely not unpatriotic. Right. It may indeed be the more patriotic thing if you're talking about doing what is right and love of country, devotion to country, and wanting to do what is right for the country and the people. If you mean it takes courage to stand up and say, wait a minute, the government is wrong, we've got to do it another way. Right. That's patriotic too, perhaps more patriotic than slavishly following government edicts.
Yeah. I'm going to get back to the technology stuff. I know, I don't know if you use J.D. Edwards software or not. But I know you've talked to a lot of, and you're very active in, or you stay on top. One question, we had a phone conversation earlier, and I asked you about the 21st century. I don't know if anybody remembers that show. But you were wasn't it a great show? It helped inspire me to become an engineer when I was a child, because I wanted my jetpack. I always wanted my jetpack that they flew around. You're a technology fan. What piece of technology do you really think affected us more than anything through the years?
The birth control pill. Well, seriously, it did considerably change society. Yeah. And it has had an important impact on us in that regard. I don't think it's the most important technological development.
It made dads a lot more comfortable.
The most important technological developments, of course, have been transportation and communication. And I think we must not forget medicine. Birth control pill comes in that regard, but also the technical aspects, the equipment that they have today, the MRIs, for heaven's sakes, the advanced heart equipment, and the rest of it is keeping people alive much longer. Our lifespan is well into the 80s now and going up all the time. I hope it keeps going up for a while. In communications, obviously television, right. The invention of television was a major step. The internet now is a further step along the same direction. The television, however, we've got to take a look at both the good and the bad side. The good side is incredible, but I think that the television has to bear a very serious, heavy load of responsibility for the discontent of the world today. In the Arab nations, in Africa and elsewhere, there's no question, and the liberation, if you please, of the Soviet Union from communism, these things have happened because of television. Television jumped borders, right. jumped iron curtains, jumped into people's lives everywhere. Little villages in Africa, they would have one television set, battery-powered television set, and they all gather around and watch the one set. Same thing in the poorest nations of the world, the Asian nations and the Arab nations. These people, for the first time, saw in life, not by movies, which they could disbelieve, but in life, the richness of our country and the Western world. They saw that, and they were jealous. They are jealous. They're demanding of their governments and demanding of us, why can't we share these riches? And of course, that's another problem entirely, they're sharing the riches. It's something we ought to attack. We ought to be thinking very seriously about Marshall Plan for the world, for heaven's sake. If the Western nations would get together and try to relieve the poverty of these other nations, we'd be relieved to a large degree of this terribly insidious warfare we're in now. Technical inventions can do that job. There's no reason why we can't take our techniques of industrial production, mass production, and get it into those countries where those people are unemployed. They could be manufacturing for the goods for the rest of their society and taking a great burden off of us.
Is the real problem, you think, maybe the technological gap that's occurring in the world? We're moving ahead, more quickly than everybody else, and it's being more derisive than bringing us together?
Well, there's undoubtedly a huge inequality with our technical achievements in the Western world, and their lack of it that is the gap that is causing the problem.
Do you see any problem today with what we show? Is there a line like the big argument recently was the showing of the murder of the correspondent in Pakistan, and there was an argument whether we should show that or not. How do you feel about that? Where does that line go again to be drawn?
Well, that's a matter of ethical, personal opinion, choice of the organization that decides to show it. There's some good argument for showing it. There's some argument for not showing it. I think the argument for not showing it is far less valid than the argument for showing it. The argument for showing it takes home to us the brutality of the people with whom we have to deal in this particular case. The argument for not showing it was almost a personal one. Why should his family have to endure that? Well, they don't have to see it. That's one of the things. And I think it's more important that we see it as the public than that they not see it. I would have made that choice.
How about the ethical belief in showing, so you want to marry a millionaire? I don't understand that one.
Well, I don't either.
What do you think of all this reality television and this?
I hate it.
Yeah.
It's exploiting the great weaknesses in all of us, you know. And
television really can do that.
It's not exploiting strength; it's exploiting weakness.
Yeah.
And there is enough reality in the real world. If they'd spend some of that money in covering what's happening in the world for us to see, the real reality, as rather than a phony reality, we'd all be a lot better off. We're not getting enough money to do the job properly in the news departments today.
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed, and you must dislike this, is the entertainment value in news now. There's so much. The lead story frequently isn't a national story. It's hey, the new fashions came out or anything. That must drive you nuts.
No, we've had a slippage over the last decade or so. Most unfortunate. It's a cause of a lot of things. We've got to be concerned about it with the established networks, the old networks, because they are still the fundamental source of information. Although that's one of the problems. They're not as much so as they were in my happy days. When I was there were only 3 networks, the 3 major networks, and we shared 98% of the audience, the 3 of us. Today, with all of the profusion of cable news channels and other entertainment channels, they're sharing less than 50% of the audience. So each of them is way down in audience compared to what they used to have. That reduces to a certain degree their income. They don't sell the advertising for quite as much money as they did with larger circulation, of course. And as a consequence, the new owners of the networks are not the old owners, the original owners, who had a deep sense of responsibility for what they were doing in broadcasting. They were taught that responsibility because they were the pioneers who sat with the Congress as Congress made up the federal communications laws and said, if we're going to give you your free licenses, then you've got a responsibility to the community to carry news and public affairs program and so forth. Well, these new guys are all entertainment people, these great conglomerates, and they have no interest in news except as money makers. And unless they turn in an amount of cash which these people feel that they should do, they're going to they have cut their budgets. Right. So we can't cover the news as we used to. Foreign news was the first to suffer. They, by poll, decided that the public wasn't interested in foreign news. Now, this was before the recent problems. Right. But they weren't interested in foreign news, therefore they didn't cover it. They withdrew all the foreign correspondents. They closed all the foreign bureaus. Terribly dangerous, right at a time when we were gaining more power as the surviving power in the world, basically. The Soviet Union was gone, and we were it. What we did was going to control very much what the world did. We had to be right. We had to know what was happening in the rest of the world. We didn't know. We weren't told. And the problem is that we needed to cover, as we did once, the most remote corners of the world. You could have a bonfire in a little country whose name we can't pronounce and we don't know where it is on the map, and that bonfire can suddenly turn into a mushroom-shaped cloud if we're not watching what's happening. That's exactly what happened with the Gulf War over Iraq and Kuwait, exactly that. We knew what was happening, but we weren't telling the people, and there was no real alarm about it, no concern. And so we're suddenly in a war. Kosovo, very much the same sort of thing. And now the Arabs, same sort of thing, the Palestinian thing. We're just not well enough informed. Old Tom Jefferson said about a democracy, he said that people that are ignorant and free expect what never can and never will be, right, which is a free government. We're not even a democracy today. We're a plutocracy of the informed and the intelligent, because the proof of that is in our elections. Not 50% of the people vote at all. Of less than 50% of the voting, perhaps 50% or a little more vote for the president. That means that something like 25% of the people are electing our government. That's not a democracy. We've got to improve our education. That's the first step. But then we also have to do a better job of informing our public of the affairs of state so that they can intelligently exercise their franchise. If they are well informed, if the material is written well, broadcast well, they'll become interested, they'll go to the polls, and democracy will be returned to this nation.
Now, we're running out of time, and we've talked a lot about, what brought us here. What is your hopes for the future? Where do you think we're going to go from here? What are we going to see in the next 10 years?
I hope to understand email.
Email?
I'm about to go to Europe. I'm going to sail the Baltic for 7 weeks. And be a week in our old stomping grounds, Betsy's and mine. We spent 2 years in Russia right after the war, and we're going to be going back there for a while. I really am. I've got to take a little drilling on how I get on the internet and out of Moscow and can get to my office, and they get to me. There's one problem, that with the internet, that it's an umbilical cord back to your office. Yeah. The old days when I was first a foreign correspondent, a war correspondent, we could only communicate with our offices, file copy. They could only reach us through cable. You had to file a cable with the cable company, and it was delivered by a Western Union or a postal telegraph boy to your office in New York, and they had to get back to you the same way. Well, you could disappear for weeks. They could never find you because you always had the excuse, well, you didn't get my cable saying I was going to Rome, and now, then came the satellite.
Yeah.
And suddenly we were tied to that umbilical to the office. You couldn't leave the office for lunch without their knowing that you were not there. And now it's even worse with the internet.
Yeah.
They really know where you are. So there are some disadvantages of the feature. That's what I got to learn, is how I can make them think I'm still on the job when I'm really on the Riviera. Can I leave those emails back behind, somewhere else?
Need a virtual Walter.
Yeah.
Now, how about the world? Do you think communication is going to help bring us together in the next 10 years?
Well, it is. It's certainly shrinking that globe of ours. It began to shrink with transportation, with the jet plane, but with the satellites, the internet, it's now shrunk to a little. It's like that globe size to golf ball size. We can travel around it instantly by communications. We are instantly in touch with every other people in the world. And as such, we're going to understand each other better. We're going to educate each other better. The television that I talked about causing the problem with people's jealousy also can bring us together with education if we use it properly. There's no reason why this country shouldn't be spending, I think, as much on communications as they do on weapons. It's a shame to me that we spend so much on weaponry. We have to defend ourselves, I know that. But when we spend all of that money, when we could be building schools and improving communication around the world so that we could use our educational system through those television sets around the world, the United States ought to have a Voice of America, a Picture of America, going out to every language in the world by television, an educational process, teaching them the elements of democracy, teaching them the beauties of democracy, teaching them the ethics of democracy. That's not the Enron story. That's not the rest of it. But we could do a much better job than we're doing, and assure, I think, the peace for the future of the world.
So you remain hopeful. Any last comments you want to share with the audience?
A wonderful audience. I didn't hear.
Aren't they great?
It's either a wonderful audience or great furniture. I didn't hear a chair squeak. I appreciate being here today. You've got a great organization, quite clearly, one that can bring this kind of enthusiasm every year, and your focus meetings, and of course the accomplishments of the organization, what you do. It's a privilege to be with you. I hope I get invited back.
Thank you very much, Walter. Thank you very much. You stay here. I'm going to say goodbye.
Thank you.